What if Africa's quietest and most far-reaching revolution began not with a politician's speech under bright lights, nor the signing of $1 billion aid agreement, but with the steady, determined hum of machines in a dusty, often overlooked town? What if the true transformation of a continent started on an ordinary morning in a place where few expected history to be made? This is not just about food. It is a direct challenge to the old, persistent idea that Africa's destiny must always be written abroad, that its future is something to be negotiated in Paris, Washington, or Beijing. Kudugu's story dares us to ask, can the resolve of one person and the united grit of a single community truly break the ancient cycle of waiting and wanting? Or will history repeat itself as so often before? Deep in the heart of Burkina Faso, far from the marble halls of state ceremonies or the glare of global headlines, something rare and remarkable took root. In Kudugu, a town once known only to those who lived and toiled in its sun-baked fields, the continent's largest rice processing plant rose. And it did so not from the largesse of foreign grants or the weight of official decrees, but from the relentless drive of a single, determined woman, Mamunata Baza. For decades, indeed for generations, the story of rice in Africa was a story of dependence and quiet frustration. Steaming bowls of rice, the staple of countless family meals, were filled with grains shipped from distant ports. The ships came from places as far away as Vietnam, Thailand, or the United States, their cargoes draining both the wallets and the pride of African families. In Kudugu, that old story began to unravel. Here, rice was transformed from a symbol of reliance into a badge of dignity, each grain harvested and processed by local hands for local tables. How did Kudugu's humming machines become the pulse of a nation? How did a forgotten town become the site of a revolution more profound than any parade or speech? To understand this unlikely revolution, we must meet its equally unlikely architect. Who is Mamunata Baza, and what drove her to defy the odds stacked higher than sacks of imported rice? The stakes are immense, and the answer is anything but certain. Africa's future hangs in the balance. Will it remain chained to outside aid, youth migration, and fraying national pride, or rise through homegrown industry and hope? If Kudugango's spark dies, the old cycle tightens its grip. But if it catches, the very meaning of independence itself could be transformed, and the continent's future rewritten. For generations, every bowl of rice in Burkina Faso carried the quiet, invisible burden of dependence. The pattern was always the same: eat, import, repeat. Families ate together, but the rice on their tables was grown on distant shores, processed in foreign factories, and brought in on ships that returned empty, leaving behind a growing sense of powerlessness. But in the year 2025, that silent surrender began to fracture. But the catalyst for real change was not a politician, nor a foreign investor, nor a team of international consultants. It was Mamunata Baza, a determined entrepreneur, haunted by the sight of Burkina Faso's rice shipped out raw, then bought back, processed, and overpriced. For Mamunata, this was not just a business problem. It was a daily injury to national dignity, a wound that reopened with every meal. Across Burkina Faso, and indeed across much of Africa, rice was never just a meal. It was a daily, unspoken tally of what the nation lacked. Each year, millions of sacks arrived by ship, draining not only precious funds, but a deeper sense of self-respect. The numbers told their own story. In 2019, over 80% of rice consumed in Burkina Faso was imported, mainly from Asia. The outflow of currency was staggering, hundreds of millions of dollars each year, gone forever. The cost, however, was more than financial. It was psychological. Every sack offloaded at the port was a reminder that local fields lay fallow, and local hands had been left idle. Breaking free seemed impossible. Governments signed agreements, donors pledged support, and aid agencies drafted blueprints, yet the ships kept docking and the local fields stayed quiet. In 2023, President Ibrahim Traoré launched an agro-pastoral offensive, not for applause, but to reclaim something fundamental, the right to feed his people with their own hands. His vision was simple, yet radical. What if Burkina Faso could become self-sufficient, not only in rice, but in all key staples? What if the nation's youth, so often tempted to risk everything for a future abroad, could find pride and prosperity at home? Yet the hardest battle was never just about economics. It was a war for hearts, minds, and the country's very sense of self. Outside the factory gates, the deeper struggle was only beginning. Mamunata dreamed bigger than a single business. She imagined rewriting her country's future in steel and glass, in labor and leadership. In the heart of Kudugu, she set out to build the largest rice processing plant on the continent. Not as a donor project, but as a fortress of independence. Not for spectacle, but as a beacon of local pride that could weather any storm. She mortgaged her family land, convinced skeptical relatives, and worked tirelessly to raise capital from local sources, village cooperatives, small-town lenders, even church and mosque groups who pooled their savings for a chance at dignity. The impact was swift and impossible to ignore. Within months, domestic rice filled nearly 1/3 of Burkina Faso's bowls, up from less than 1/10 just a year before. More than 20,000 farmers now had a guaranteed buyer, empowering them to invest in their land, organize cooperatives, and believe in new possibilities. Stories spread of farmers buying their first tractors, sending their children to university, or even building brick houses where thatch once stood. Everything was at stake. If local efforts like Kudugu's plant faltered or were dismissed, the old cycle of dependence would tighten its grip. But if they succeeded, a fresh model for prosperity and dignity would take root, crafted by African hands for African futures. The broader lesson echoed the Green Revolution in Asia during the 1960s. When local knowledge and ambition are matched by accessible technology, even the poorest regions can transform. But Africa, so often the recipient rather than the architect of change, had never fully owned this process. The steady hum of Kudugu's machines unsettled more than markets. It rattled assumptions from Paris to Ouagadougou. What began as a bold local experiment soon sent shockwaves rippling far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In the corridors of power in Brussels and Washington, analysts debated whether this model could spread to other staples. Maize in Malawi, cassava in Nigeria, millet in Senegal. As rice from the new plant began to reach communities, resistance surfaced in unexpected places. Some traders, accustomed to importing foreign grain, resisted the change. Families questioned the taste, texture, or price of the new rice. Old habits and loyalties clashed with new opportunities. Religious and community leaders were enlisted to promote the local product, sharing meals in public squares, inviting neighbors to taste and compare. In schools, teachers held special lessons on the value of self-reliance, drawing parallels to independence movements of the past. Inside the plant, over 10,000 new jobs were forged, each one lifting a family out of poverty. Rice farming, once a struggle for daily survival, became a path to lasting prosperity. With every contract signed and every sack of rice processed, the spark of hope ignited across the countryside. Young people who once dreamed of risking treacherous journeys across the Sahara or the Mediterranean now found purpose and pride at home. Within months, the number of youth seeking migration papers at local offices fell by 1/5, a clear sign that dignity had returned and futures could be built in Burkina Faso's fields and factories. Within Burkina Faso, the political conversation shifted. Empty promises were replaced by hard evidence, visible, replicable progress. Politicians, opposition leaders, and even law students started speaking not of aid and dependency, but of sovereignty, ownership, and pride. Economic forums that once focused on donor relations now held panels on local value chains, and journalists covered the rise of domestic brands in grocery stores. Mamunata Baza became more than an entrepreneur. She was a beacon for women across the region. Mothers, daughters, and grandmothers saw in her a living example of what could be achieved. Women's groups began organizing visits to the plant, learning not only about rice processing, but about business management, leadership, and advocacy. Stories spread of young girls who, inspired by Mamunata, chose to study agricultural engineering or business administration. Families gathered around tables with rice grown, milled, and packaged by their own hands. At weddings and naming ceremonies, guests made a point to serve and praise the local rice, turning every meal into an act of solidarity. News of Kudugu's triumph spread across the continent. The African diaspora and neighbors in Ghana, Niger, and beyond watched closely, eager to replicate this model of self-reliance. Radio shows in Accra and Bamako featured interviews with Mamunata, while community leaders in Lagos organized delegations to tour the plant. Meanwhile, European and American officials, used to seeing Africa as a market for their rice and a recipient of their aid, began to worry. Exporters lobbied for new trade deals, while aid agencies debated whether their own models needed to change. NGOs and advocacy groups redirected their efforts towards scaling local industries. The language of development changed. It was no longer about waiting for handouts, but about building with their own hands. Each harvest, each job, each shipment of locally packaged rice was a declaration. Burkina Faso would chart its own destiny. The ripple effect was clear. Other towns began organizing their own cooperatives, pooling resources to invest in small-scale processing plants for vegetables, groundnuts, and even shea butter. But for now, the rhythm of the machines continues, a challenge to all who benefit from Africa's old story. In Kudugu, the future is being written in steel, sweat, and the steady clatter of self-reliance. Every awakening comes with hope and a warning. What began in Kudugu is more than a local success. It is a test, and its outcome could shape the fate of nations across Africa. But change is never welcomed by everyone. Shadows gather as those threatened by Kudugu's rise begin to plot their response. Some importers spread rumors about the quality of local rice. Foreign lobbyists pressure governments to lower tariffs on imported grain. Even some local politicians, seeing their influence threatened, quietly undermine the project. Yet with every step forward, new risks emerged. The plant's success threatened powerful interests, from foreign exporters desperate to protect their share, to aid agencies invested in the logic of dependency. Rumor spread of attempts to sabotage supply lines, of legal challenges mounted in foreign courts over trademark disputes. If Kudugu faltered, the fragile momentum could collapse, and old hierarchies would quickly return. The memory of similar efforts crushed in the past, such as Ghana's Operation Feed Yourself in the 1970s, or Nigeria's rice self-sufficiency drive in the 1980s, hung like a warning cloud. The threats are ceaseless. Cheap rice from Asia could sweep in, crushing local price gains overnight. The plant's dependence on foreign machine parts leaves it vulnerable to global supply chain shocks. Sabotage, whether economic or political, always lurks at the edge of progress. Stories abound of similar projects in other countries, like Ethiopia's textile factories or Kenya's flower farms, being threatened by sudden currency crises or unexpected political turmoil. Ownership remains precarious. Corruption could seep back, quietly draining away hard-won gains. Opportunistic investors from abroad might seize local shares, turning a symbol of national pride into a stream of foreign profit. Even local complacency, a sense that the job is done, could undermine the spirit that built Kudugu. The story of Zambia's privatized copper mines, where foreign ownership led to the outflow of profits and local disillusionment, stands as a cautionary tale. Some dangers can be blunted. Kudugu's hybrid solar energy and on-site storage shield it from fuel shortages and blackouts. The plant invested in local technician training, ensuring that basic repairs could be handled without waiting for foreign experts. Farmers organized drought insurance schemes, learning from the failures of the 1973 Sahel drought. But no system is invincible. A single severe drought, A sudden change in government policy or a lapse in quality control could unravel years of effort overnight. So what can entrepreneurs, leaders, and ordinary citizens learn from Kudugu's fragile revolution? How can they avoid the mistakes of the past and ensure that this time the gains are not lost? Yet the deepest risk runs beneath the surface. The true miracle in Kudugu is not just machinery or output, it is the quiet revolution in belief. People now see that progress can start at home, and dignity can be built by their own hands. This conviction is both fortress and glass, strong yet fragile. Should it falter, old habits of dependency could return, sinking even deeper than before. The lesson of Zimbabwe's land reform, where optimism was followed by years of hardship, serves as a reminder that belief alone is not enough. It must be reinforced by careful planning and vigilance. History offers both a spark and a shadow. Movements like Kudugu have flared up before, only to be smothered by outside pressure, inertia, or betrayal. The question is not just whether this factory will survive, but whether a new mindset, rooted in agency and resilience, can truly endure. Will Kudugu inspire 1,000 more towns, or will it become another footnote, a bright but brief spark in the long struggle for self-determination? Still, the rewards are immense if the model spreads. Across Africa, similar factories could save hundreds of millions each year, money now lost to imports, and change the continent's relationship with global markets. Food could become a source of strength, not a point of weakness. The stakes are staggering. Dignity, economic power, and the hope of future generations hang in the balance. One failure could confirm old narratives of disappointment, but lasting success could rewrite Africa's story. The example of South Korea, which in the 1960s transformed itself from a food aid recipient to a major exporter through a focus on domestic industry, shows what is possible when belief and investment align. The answer may decide not only the fate of one town, but the direction of a continent. The lessons from Kudugu are urgent, and the stakes could not be higher. Here are practical steps, drawn from Kudugu's experience and the successes and failures of similar efforts around the world. Second, build skills. Training local engineers, technicians, and managers is essential. Kudugu's plant partnered with technical schools to offer apprenticeships. This not only created jobs, but built a culture of pride in local expertise. When Ghana's cocoa industry invested in local research and training, it became less vulnerable to foreign manipulation. First, invest in local ownership. Every step, from fundraising to management, must prioritize local voices. The plant in Kudugu succeeded because it was owned by cooperatives, farmers, and local investors who had real stakes in its survival. This reduces the risk of sudden buyouts or shifts in control when foreign capital enters the picture. Examples abound. The Mondragon cooperatives in Spain have survived for decades because ownership and benefits are widely shared. Third, diversify supply chains. The plant's leaders work to source as many parts and inputs as possible from within the region. They also set up contingency plans, such as maintaining an inventory of critical spare parts and developing relationships with multiple suppliers. Lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic showed that over-reliance on a single foreign supplier can cripple even the strongest industries. Fourth, foster community buy-in. Kudugu's leaders organized town hall meetings, school visits, and open days at the factory. They listened to concerns and adapted their products to local tastes. When India promoted locally grown and processed rice in the 1970s, they used radio, festivals, and school programs to change cultural preferences. Sixth, reinvest profits locally. Rather than exporting earnings, the plant funded scholarships, health clinics, and infrastructure projects. This built loyalty and resilience. The Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, for example, used microloans to reinforce local economic cycles, multiplying their impact. Fifth, anticipate and counter external pressures. Kudugu established a legal defense fund ready to fight trademark or trade challenges in courts. Partnerships with local media helped counter misinformation campaigns. When Brazil's ethanol industry faced foreign lobbying, it responded with public education and strategic alliances with domestic political leaders. Seventh, prepare for environmental shocks. Kudugu invested in drought-resistant seed varieties, efficient irrigation, and crop insurance. When Vietnam's rice industry faced floods in the 1980s, government and local associations created rapid response teams to minimize losses and recover quickly. Finally, never let momentum stall. Every success must be met with the question, what next? In Kudugu, new cooperatives are now planning to process maize, peanuts, and even fruit. The lesson is that self-reliance is not a destination, but a continuous journey. When Mamunata Baza built her rice processing plant, she shattered the myth that only governments or foreign investors can transform a nation. Her initiative moved faster than decades of outside aid. Fields that once lay silent now pulse with energy. Young people who once dreamed of leaving now find work, structure, and pride at home. What happens when ordinary people stop waiting for permission and begin building right where they stand? History turns not on declarations, but on the quiet, repeated actions of those who refuse to give up. Kudugu's story is no distant myth. It is a living blueprint traced by real hands and real risks. Sovereignty does not arrive on the back of billion-dollar promises or declarations from faraway capitals. It starts small, one plant, one cooperative, one new product, each born from courage and the refusal to wait. True transformation is measured not by headlines, but in kitchens where families cook rice grown and milled nearby. In classrooms where students see local success and dare to dream. In town meetings where hope replaces resignation and possibility becomes contagious. These are the places where dignity is restored and the future is decided. Dignity in Kudugu is not a slogan. It is the aroma of grain, the steady rhythm of machines, and the pride of a wage earned and shared. It is the sense that real work and real ownership can change hearts and futures, something speeches alone never achieve. In Kudugu, as in post-war Japan or post-colonial India, the rhythm of machines became a symbol of rebirth, a visible sign that progress was possible. Kudugu's rhythm is more than the hum of machines. It is the pulse of a community reclaiming its future, one practical step at a time. Now every region, every village across Africa faces the same challenge. What can we build today with our own hands and vision? The experiences of Rwanda's coffee cooperatives or Morocco's solar power projects show that locally anchored efforts can scale, but only if communities take ownership and adapt solutions to their needs. As the machines of Kudugu echo across the continent, they are no longer just a local story. They invite each of us to listen, to respond, and to ask, what is the first small, bold step we can take in our own community today? Is it forming a cooperative, launching a local business, supporting a neighbor's dream, or simply refusing to accept that things cannot change? Yet every story faces resistance. What happens when old habits and old powers push back against local ambition? Will Kudugu be remembered as the spark that set a continent ablaze, or as a hopeful flame left to fade in silence? If you watch from a distance, waiting for the next big investor or sweeping policy, you may miss your own chance to lead or to support change nearby. Kudugu's lesson does not linger forever. Momentum, once sparked, must be fed. Opportunities, once revealed, must be seized. The world is full of examples, like the rise of Silicon Valley or the rebirth of Medellin, Colombia, where those who acted early reaped the greatest rewards. Africa's future will not be shaped by wishes, but by work, by moments of daring that echo outward and change the odds for millions. Kudugu's legacy depends on people who believe sovereignty is not only a word, but a duty to be earned and guarded, one harvest and one invention at a time. A single factory, built not by charity but by fierce local conviction, has broken chains of dependency that lasted for generations. One woman, Mamunata Baza, stopped waiting for outside approval. She transformed frustration into pride and pride into possibility. Now, the weight and the choice rests on all who have heard her story. What comes next is not decided by presidents or foreign banks. It lives in the hands of those who choose to remember and to act. Every time you speak Kudugu's name, you amplify a new rhythm of dignity and self-reliance. Every conversation you spark, every idea you encourage, is a quiet rebellion against letting this flame die. As the proverb goes, when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. This is not only a story about rice, or about machines, or even about one extraordinary woman. It is a question that tests our memory and our courage. Do we let Kudugu slip away as yesterday's news, or do we carry its lesson forward, turning story into action? The fate of past revolutions, whether the failed industrial policies of Tanzania's Ujamaa or the remarkable successes of Botswana's diamond industry, reminds us that the outcome depends not just on leaders, but on the energy and vigilance of ordinary people. So ask yourself, how will you remember Kudugu? As a distant miracle, or as proof that ordinary hands can ignite revolutions? The answer is written in every field planted, every machine repaired, every meal shared. Let Kudugu be not the end, but the beginning of 1,000 new stories. Stories where Africa's future is built and owned at home.